What if the most powerful weapon in a modern war is not a missile, a fighter jet, or a nuclear submarine, but a 5-mile-long island that almost nobody outside military circles has ever heard of? Because hidden inside the Persian Gulf is a piece of territory that proves something uncomfortable about 21st century warfare. You do not always have to defeat an army to pressure a nation. Sometimes you only need to find the one place where a country's survival passes through, and for Iran, that place is Kharg Island. From above, it does not look like the center of a geopolitical struggle. On a satellite image, Kharg appears almost insignificant. A narrow strip of land surrounded by blue water. No massive cities, no mountains, no obvious battlefield. But beneath that quiet surface sits something far more valuable than territory. A connection point. A place where energy, economics, military strategy, and global politics all collide. Because the real question surrounding Kharg Island is not, can this island survive an attack? The deeper question is, can a country survive if the world knows exactly where its economic heartbeat is located? And that is where the story becomes much larger than one island. Because Kharg represents a new kind of battlefield. A battlefield where pipelines can be as important as tanks. Where satellite images can matter as much as aircraft. Where economic pressure can become a weapon, and where the most important targets are not always the ones that explode. They are the ones that create choices. For decades, Kharg Island has been the center of Iran's oil export system. The reason is simple: geography. The island sits in the Persian Gulf with access to deep water, allowing large oil tankers to load crude before traveling into international markets. That geography transformed a small piece of rock into a strategic asset. Because oil does not move through a country randomly. It moves through systems, fields, pipelines, storage facilities, loading terminals, shipping routes. Remove one part of that system, and the entire network begins to feel pressure. This is the first contradiction of Kharg Island. It is incredibly valuable because it is powerful. But it is also valuable because it is vulnerable, and that vulnerability has existed for decades. During the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, Iraqi forces repeatedly targeted Kharg because planners understood something that remains true today. A nation's military strength depends on more than weapons. It depends on the ability to finance them. The missiles, the aircraft, the soldiers, the logistics. All of it requires resources, and resources require infrastructure. The lesson here is simple. In modern conflict, the battlefield often begins long before the first shot is fired. It begins inside the economic system that allows a nation to keep fighting. But here is the problem. Attacking economic infrastructure is not the same as attacking a military base. A military target is designed to be destroyed. An economic target is connected to the entire world. On a commander's map, Kharg Island may look like a pressure point. But on a global energy map, it is part of a much larger machine. Every barrel of oil that leaves the Persian Gulf affects markets thousands of miles away. A disruption does not stop at the coastline. IT travels from shipping lanes to refineries to fuel prices to political pressure inside other countries. The island is not isolated. It is connected to everyone. And that creates the second contradiction. The same infrastructure that gives Iran economic power also creates limits on how others can attack it. Because destroying the system may hurt the target, but it can also damage the attacker. This changes the calculation completely. Imagine a military planning room. A satellite image is projected onto a screen. Analysts are not just looking at buildings, they are looking at relationships. Which pipelines connect here? Which ships depend on this location? How quickly could exports recover? What happens if this node disappears? Because modern warfare is increasingly about understanding systems, not just destroying objects. A runway is not important because it is concrete. It is important because aircraft depend on it. A radar station is not important because of the equipment inside it. It is important because it changes what an enemy believes is possible. And an oil terminal is not important because of the tanks sitting beside it. It is important because it keeps an entire political and military structure functioning. The island itself is not the weapon. The dependency it creates is the weapon. This is why Kharg has become such a powerful symbol in strategic thinking, because it represents a shift happening across the world. For much of history, wars were decided by armies meeting on battlefields, armored divisions, infantry formations, naval fleets. But modern conflicts increasingly involve something different: networks, supply chains, energy routes, industrial capacity, information. A country can have advanced weapons and still face pressure if the systems supporting those weapons become vulnerable. This is the invisible battlefield, and Kharg Island sits directly inside it. But the island's importance creates another question. If everyone knows Kharg matters, why is it so difficult to use that advantage? Because knowing a weakness exists does not automatically mean you can exploit it. The military challenge is enormous. The Persian Gulf is one of the most monitored regions on Earth. Aircraft, ships, drones, coastal defenses, missile systems, electronic warfare. Every movement creates signals. Every operation creates consequences. A strike is not simply about reaching a target. It is about what happens afterward. What does the opponent do? How do markets react? How do allies respond? How quickly can the system adapt? The visible battlefield may involve aircraft and missiles, but the hidden battlefield involves decisions. And this is where the world often misunderstands strategic warfare. People see weapons. They see explosions. They see military platforms. But behind every operation is a much larger question: who can create pressure without losing control? Because the strongest military advantage is not, sometimes it is restraint. A nation may have the ability to damage something, but the real power comes from deciding when not to. That creates uncertainty, and uncertainty itself becomes a weapon. The part most people miss is that Kharg Island is not just an energy facility. It is a test of strategic endurance. For Iran, it represents economic survival. For any opponent, it represents leverage. For global markets, it represents instability. And for military planners, it represents a difficult equation. How do you pressure a system without triggering a crisis that spreads beyond the battlefield? Because the future of warfare may not be decided by who has the biggest explosion. It may be decided by who understands the hidden connections between everything. The island, the pipelines, the tankers, the economy, the politics, all connected by one fragile line. And that leads to the question that changes the entire story. Everyone thinks the battle around Kharg Island is about controlling oil. But what if the real battle is about controlling choices? Because whoever controls those choices may not need to destroy the island at all. They may only need the world to believe they can. Everyone thinks this battle is about an island, a piece of land barely visible on a map. Few miles of coastline. Collection of storage tanks, pipelines, and loading platforms. But the real battle is about something much larger. It is about whether a nation can continue operating when its most important economic artery becomes vulnerable. Because Kharg Island is not powerful because of what it is powerful because of what depends on it, and that changes the entire meaning of the conflict. The island is not just an energy facility, it is a pressure point, a place where military power, economic survival, and political calculation collide. And this is where the battlefield moves underground, not beneath the island, but beneath the headlines. Because modern warfare is no longer only about destroying enemy weapons, it is about controlling the choices available to the enemy. A missile strike can destroy a radar system. A cyber attack can disrupt a network. A blockade can delay a shipment, but the most powerful effect is often invisible. The enemy begins asking, How long can we continue? How much pressure can our economy absorb? How many risks can our leadership take? That is the hidden battlefield, the war of decisions, and Kharg Island sits directly in the center of it. Look at a satellite image of the Persian Gulf. The first thing you notice is geography, the narrow waters, the crowded shipping routes, the coastline stretching across one of the world's most important energy regions. But the part most people miss is this. Geography creates strategy long before weapons ever arrive. A country can build thousands of missiles, it can develop drones, it can create underground facilities, but it cannot easily move a coastline. It cannot relocate a deep water port overnight. It cannot instantly rebuild decades of energy infrastructure somewhere else. That is why strategic geography matters. Because geography creates limitations, and limitations create vulnerability. The lesson here is simple. The strongest position in a conflict is not always the place with the most weapons. Sometimes it is the place where the enemy has the fewest alternatives. But here is the problem. Economic pressure is not the same thing as victory. History has repeatedly shown that nations under pressure do not always surrender. Sometimes they adapt. Sometimes they become more aggressive. Sometimes they accept enormous costs because political survival matters more than economic efficiency. And this creates the central dilemma of using economic choke points as weapons. Pressure must be strong enough to change behavior, but not so extreme that it removes every reason for compromise. Because when a government believes survival itself is threatened, the calculation changes. The question is no longer, how do we avoid escalation? The question becomes, what do we risk by not escalating? And that is where every pressure campaign becomes dangerous. Inside military command centers thousands of miles away, analysts are not only watching explosions, they are watching patterns, satellite images, shipping movements, oil prices, insurance rates, political statements. Every piece of information becomes part of a larger puzzle. Because in modern conflict, information itself becomes a weapon. The side that understands reality faster gains an advantage. The side trapped by misinformation makes mistakes. This is why every conflict around a strategic location creates another battlefield, the information battlefield. 2. Different versions of reality compete. One side says the pressure is ineffective. The other says the pressure is working. And somewhere between those two narratives is the real strategic picture. The part most people miss is that controlling the story can sometimes be almost as important as controlling the territory. But the deeper lesson of Kharg Island goes beyond Iran. It represents a pattern appearing across the world. Modern wars increasingly focus on networks, energy networks, supply networks, communication networks, industrial networks. The old image of warfare was simple: army versus army, tank versus tank, aircraft versus aircraft. But the modern battlefield looks different. A single infrastructure node can influence millions of people. A port can affect markets. A pipeline can affect alliances. A shipping route can affect global prices. The battlefield has expanded. And sometimes the most important targets are not on the front line. They are the systems that allow a country to continue fighting. This changes everything because military strength is no longer measured only by destruction capability. A nation may have advanced weapons, but can it sustain operations? Can it replace losses? Can it maintain public support? Can its economy survive pressure? These questions decide long conflicts. A fighter jet can win a battle. A carrier group can control a region. A missile can destroy a target. But industrial capacity determines who can continue. That is why energy infrastructure has become such a central part of strategic competition. Oil is not just fuel. It is military endurance. It is government revenue. It is the ability to purchase technology, maintain forces, and influence other countries. Destroy the weapon, and you remove capability. Disrupt the economic engine, and you challenge the entire system behind the weapon. Now imagine the future battlefield. Not a battlefield filled with tanks crossing borders, but one where satellites identify vulnerabilities, artificial intelligence analyzes supply chains, cyber operations target infrastructure, navies protect commercial routes, and governments compete over the invisible systems that keep nations alive. In that world, a small island can become more important than a large battlefield, because importance is no longer determined by size, it is determined by connection. Kharg Island matters because it connects energy production to national power, and that principle applies everywhere. The same logic exists around semiconductor factories, rare earth minerals, major shipping lanes, undersea cables, critical infrastructure. The next generation of conflicts may not begin with an invasion. They may begin with a calculation. What single system gives this country its ability to function? The bigger picture is that modern warfare is becoming a competition between resilience and vulnerability. Every nation has strengths, but every nation also has pressure points. The question is whether those pressure points can be protected, replaced, or exploited. For Iran, Kharg Island represents economic dependence. For other countries, different vulnerabilities exist. The lesson is universal. A powerful nation is not only defined by the weapons it possesses. It is defined by how many ways it can survive, losing something important. So the story of Kharg Island is not really the story of an island. It is the story of a new era of warfare, an era where the battlefield extends from the ocean to the economy, from military bases to financial markets, from command rooms to global supply chains. The question is no longer who has the strongest military. The real question is who can protect the invisible systems that allow a military to exist in the first place. Because in future conflicts, victory may not belong only to the side that can destroy more. It may belong to the side that can endure longer. And that raises the final question. Do you think future wars will be decided by superior weapons, or by whoever controls the critical systems behind those weapons?